On the night of her wedding, Tiana Brooks discovered a truth so shocking. Within hours, her husband was dead, and she was in handcuffs. The man she married wasn't who he said he was. And when she tried to leave, he tried to stop her. What happened next would spark a national firestorm about love, deception, and the devastating price of silence. Tiana Brooks was the kind of woman who didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. At 29, she had already been through one failed marriage, survived a betrayal that shattered her trust, and rebuilt her life from scratch. She had a decent job as a data analyst in Atlanta, a circle of loyal friends, and a quiet little apartment with a cat named Monroe. Romance? That was on the shelf, tucked between Too Risky and Never Again. That all changed the day she met Elias Johnson. He was everything her ex-husband wasn't: sharp, polished, articulate. A 41-year-old attorney with a pristine record, Elias specialized in family law and had even published a best-selling book titled The Honest Marriage. He was often featured on morning talk shows, giving advice on how couples should communicate, build trust, and maintain emotional transparency. Ironically, they first crossed paths at a legal tech conference where Tiana's company had set up a booth. Elias had stopped by, not for the software, but, he later admitted, because he noticed the way she smiled despite looking like she didn't want to be there. "I could tell you were faking it," he'd said with that confident, almost too perfect grin. "But you were still kind. That's rare these days." Tiana rolled her eyes and dismissed it as another smooth-talking professional making small talk. But Elias kept showing up, inviting her to lunch, sending her articles he thought she'd like, leaving her voice messages that sounded more like quiet reflections than flirtation. Over time, she let her guard down. Slowly, carefully. He never pushed, never crossed any physical boundaries. In fact, one of the things that stood out to her was how gentle he was, emotionally available, attentive, and respectful of her space. When she asked why he never made a move, Elias would just say, "The right connection doesn't need rushing. We're building something sacred, Tiana. Let's protect it." For a woman who had been cheated on and lied to for years, those words were healing. They dated for 14 months. No sex. Not even close. At first, Tiana assumed it was part of his values. Elias was deeply religious and often spoke about preserving intimacy for marriage. He called it emotional fasting, and while it sometimes made her curious or frustrated, she respected his boundary. After all, this man wasn't some random guy off a dating app. This was a pillar of the legal community, someone who helped other couples stay together. When he proposed to her on a balcony overlooking Savannah's riverfront, with fairy lights and a string quartet, Tiana cried. Not because she was surprised, but because she was finally allowing herself to believe it. "This is what it feels like to be chosen," she whispered to herself that night. Really chosen. The months leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of magazine interviews. Elias had made the top 10 most influential black lawyers in Georgia list. Premarital counseling, bridal fittings, and endless well wishes from strangers who followed their story online. People called them black excellence personified. They got married on a warm spring afternoon, in front of 100 guests, under an oak tree draped in silk and flowers. Tiana wore ivory. Elias wore a custom charcoal suit and smiled like a man who had finally won the lottery. Their first dance was to At Last by Etta James. Everything looked perfect. Everyone said it felt perfect, and Tiana believed it, until the door to their honeymoon suite closed behind them. She had no idea that the man she had just married was hiding something so unimaginable, so intimate, that within hours, one of them would be dead, and the other behind bars. The wedding was straight out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and vows so poetic the crowd teared up. Even Tiana's mother, who had always kept her guard up around men, especially older ones, was visibly moved. Elias held Tiana's hands and looked into her eyes as he promised to cherish her forever. "You are my safe harbor," he said, "and I'll protect you with every breath I have." Tiana felt like she was floating. After years of disappointment, she finally found a man who wasn't just charming. He was solid, dependable, safe. But not everything was perfect. There were small things that in hindsight should have made her pause. Elias never changed clothes in front of her, not even a shirt. When she once playfully opened the bathroom door while he was inside, he snapped. Not in anger, but in panic, like she had seen something she wasn't supposed to. "Please," he whispered after slamming the door shut. "I need privacy. I wasn't ready." He apologized 100 times after, blamed it on childhood trauma, said modesty was part of his spiritual practice. Tiana accepted it. Everyone has quirks, right? There were no bachelor party stories, no exes, no past relationships beyond vague mentions. Elias called himself a late bloomer, said he didn't have time for dating because he spent most of his youth studying law and taking care of his sick mother. And the way he told it, softly, humbly, almost felt guilty for even wondering. "I'm just grateful God saved me for you," he once told her. "I didn't think I'd ever find a woman who could love me for who I am." Tiana believed him. She wanted to. On their wedding night, they checked into a luxury suite at the Magnolia Grand, one of Charleston's finest hotels. The room had a private terrace, a soaking tub with rose petals, and a bottle of Dom Perignon waiting on ice. They kissed, laughed, toasted to forever. Tiana slipped into a silk robe while Elias excused himself to the bathroom. Her heart was racing, not just from nerves, but from something deeper. This was their moment, the first time they would truly share themselves, physically, emotionally, fully. She turned down the lights, lit a candle, and waited on the bed. When Elias came out, he was quiet. Too quiet. He climbed into bed without looking her in the eye. Tiana leaned in and kissed him, gently at first, then with more urgency. He kissed back, but something was off. His hands trembled. His whole body was tense, like he was bracing for impact. She whispered, "It's okay. I love you. You don't have to be scared." Elias nodded. "I know. I've waited so long for this. It's overwhelming." And she reached down and froze. There was nothing. No penis. No testicles. No scars. No signs of surgery. Just smooth, flat skin. For a second, she thought maybe he'd been injured. Maybe it was medical. Maybe he was wearing something. "Elias," she whispered, voice cracking, "what is this?" His face collapsed. All the composure he had carefully built over the past year crumbled in an instant. "Please don't scream," he begged. "Please. I wanted to tell you. I tried. So many times." Tiana backed away. Her body went cold. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear him. "What are you talking about?" she asked, voice rising. "What is this, Elias? What the hell is going on?" "I was born intersex," he choked out. "I don't have male or female genitalia. I was raised as a boy, but my body, it never developed like it should have. Doctor said I could live a normal life if I just kept quiet. So I did. I kept quiet. My whole life." Tiana stared at him like he was a stranger, because in that moment he was... "You married me," she said slowly, "without telling me any of this. I thought you'd leave," he whispered. "I thought, if you got to know me first, the real me, you'd love me enough to stay." Tiana was shaking now, with confusion, with rage, with heartbreak. The man who had preached honesty, who had built a career advising couples to be transparent and true, had lied to her about the most intimate part of himself. "You didn't give me a choice," she spat. "You decided for me. You trapped me." "I didn't trap you," Elias said, his voice cracking into desperation. "I loved you. I still do. I just couldn't bear to lose you." He reached out, but Tiana pulled away. Everything was spinning. Her wedding dress lay crumpled on the chair. The champagne still bubbled in the glasses. And the man beside her, this polished, eloquent, admired man, was unraveling into someone unrecognizable. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and moved toward the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, standing up fast. "Anywhere but here." "You can't leave," he said sharply. "Watch me." Then his tone changed. Deeper, darker. "If this gets out," he said, stepping toward her, "I lose everything. My firm, my license, my life." Tiana narrowed her eyes. "So what? I'm just supposed to shut up and live a lie for you." "You don't understand," he snapped. "People like me, we don't get second chances. I finally had something, someone, and you're going to take it all away because I was born broken?" She stared at him. "You weren't broken, Elias. You were just a coward." And in that moment, something snapped in both of them. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Tiana's hand was already on the door handle when Elias grabbed her wrist. Not roughly, not yet, but firm enough to stop her. "Please," he said again, eyes wide, frantic. "Don't walk out that door." She yanked her hand free. "Let go of me, Elias." His face twisted in desperation. "You don't understand what this means for me." "I understand perfectly," she snapped. "You lied. For over a year. You married me under false pretenses, and now you're scared I'll ruin your perfect little world." Elias's jaw tightened. "You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted to live like this, hiding, terrified someone would see me and call me a freak?" The word hung heavy in the air. Tiana's voice softened, but only for a moment. "You didn't have to hide. You could have told me. I would have," she hesitated, "I would have respected the truth." Elias stepped closer. "And you would have run, just like everyone else." "Don't lie. I had a right to know," she hissed. "You stole my choice. You made a fool of me." Then he said it, the one thing that turned her stomach inside out. "But you said you loved me. Isn't that more than physical?" Tiana blinked at him in disbelief. "Don't twist this. Love without truth is manipulation." And suddenly his tone shifted. The lawyer in him came out. Cold, controlled, sharp-edged. "If you go public with this, I will sue you for defamation. You'll never work in this city again." Her mouth dropped open. "Are you threatening me?" she said, voice trembling. "I'm protecting what's mine," he said, stepping forward again. "Everything I've built, my reputation, my name, you don't get to destroy it just because you're upset." Tiana backed away, bumping into the corner of the dresser. Her breath came faster. This wasn't the same man who'd kissed her under the oak tree. This wasn't the gentle, thoughtful fiancé who quoted scripture and told her she was his blessing. This was someone else, someone she had never seen before. "You're insane," she whispered. "You care more about your image than the fact that you lied to your wife." His voice dropped to a near growl. "I am your husband. Not anymore." That broke him. In one sudden movement, Elias lunged forward, grabbing both her arms and slamming her against the wall. The impact knocked the breath out of her. "You're not leaving me," he shouted. "I gave you everything." Tiana struggled. "Get off me. You're hurting me." They stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp. The room plunged into half-darkness. The candle on the nightstand flickered violently. She kicked, pushed, scratched, but Elias was bigger, heavier, driven by a lifetime of shame and fear. Then she saw it, the edge of the marble coffee table behind him. With all her strength, Tiana shoved him backward. He stumbled, lost his footing, and fell. There was a sickening crack as the back of his head collided with the edge of the table. And just like that, he stopped moving. Tiana froze. Her hands trembled as she stared at his body, sprawled awkwardly on the floor, one arm twisted under him, eyes half open. A thin trail of blood began to snake along the marble surface. "Elias?" she whispered. No answer. She rushed over, dropped to her knees, shook him. Elias, please. Please wake up. But he didn't. His chest wasn't rising. His skin had gone pale in seconds. There was no pulse. He was gone. It would be easy to paint Elias as a liar, a manipulator, a man who built his life on half-truths. But long before he was Elias Johnson, the lawyer, the author, the face of marital honesty, he was Elijah Jameson, a boy hiding in plain sight. He was 6 years old when the truth first showed up on a cold exam table. His mother sat stiff in the corner of the room, lips tight with fear, while the pediatric specialist explained in gentle terms what no parent ever expects to hear. Elijah has complete androgen insensitivity, genetically male, but his body didn't respond to testosterone. That's why his genitalia never developed externally. His mother didn't ask a single question. She just gripped her Bible harder and said, "He's a boy. That's all anyone needs to know." From that day on, Elijah understood something most children don't have to learn. Some truths aren't safe. Some truths make people look at you like you're broken. So you build a life on silence. In school, he learned how to change for gym without exposing anything. He showered at odd hours, avoided swimming pools, laughed off locker room jokes without flinching. He became a master of the invisible boundary. But the silence didn't protect him from his shame. He felt it every time a classmate asked why he didn't date. Every time he looked in a mirror and saw a body that looked normal but never felt like it belonged to him. At 16, a girl named Marissa tried to kiss him under the bleachers after school. He pulled away so fast she asked if she'd done something wrong. He told her no. Then he skipped school for a week. At 18, Elijah found a forum online buried deep on a medical board where someone described a condition that sounded like his. For the first time, he saw the words intersex as non-binary anatomy. He didn't feel seen. He felt exposed. In law school, he reinvented himself. Elijah Jameson became Elias Johnson. Clean, confident, sharp. Someone who didn't just follow the rules, he taught them. The law gave him structure, a place where truth was objective, where words mattered more than flesh. But he still avoided intimacy like a live wire. Only once, in 2014, did he come close. Her name was Nicole. She was studying social work, asked the kind of questions that made him want to bolt, but also made him feel for a moment like maybe he didn't have to hide. She asked why he never let her touch him below the waist, why he panicked when she took off his shirt, why his bedroom always stayed dark. He told her it was religious conviction. She didn't believe him, and when she pushed harder, he disappeared. She was the one who, years later, would write to Tiana, not to accuse, not to blame, but to say, "You weren't the only one." That was the legacy Elias carried into his marriage. A boy buried beneath a man, a truth buried beneath a life, and a love he never believed he deserved unless he kept the lie alive. For several minutes, all Tiana could do was sit there, in her wedding night lingerie, knees bruised, arms scraped, surrounded by shattered glass and silence. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to end like this. She picked up her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Tiana's voice cracked. I think I killed my husband. By the time police arrived, she was curled in the corner of the suite, wrapped in a hotel robe, her face blank and drained. The officer who first entered later testified that he had never seen so much sadness and shock on someone's face who just admitted to homicide. Detectives secured the scene. The hotel staff was told to keep quiet, but news spread fast. The beloved Atlanta attorney, family law expert, and marriage counselor, dead just hours after saying "I do." And the bride? Sitting in the back of a squad car, still wearing her wedding ring, whispering the same thing over and over. He didn't tell me. He never told me. Tiana spent her first night in the holding cell, sitting upright on the metal bench, hands still trembling, mind replaying everything in jagged flashes. The flicker of candlelight. His eyes when she said, "Not anymore." The sound his skull made when it hit marble. Somewhere around 3 a.m., she threw up. There was nothing in her stomach but guilt and champagne. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears felt stuck behind a wall too thick to break. When they finally let her call someone, she didn't call her mom. She called her cousin Simone, who'd once said, "If you ever end up in trouble so big you can't breathe, just say my name." Simone answered on the second ring and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then, "I'm coming. Say nothing to no one." The next morning, Tiana sat in a blank interrogation room, staring at her reflection in the two-way glass. Still in a hotel robe, still wearing the necklace Elias had clasped around her neck hours earlier, whispering, "Forever starts tonight." Forever had lasted less than 4 hours. She didn't feel like a killer, but she didn't feel innocent either. She felt hollow. Simone picked her up after she was released on bail. They drove back to her apartment in silence. Tiana sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her wedding dress, still in its garment bag, untouched. Her phone vibrated with calls, texts, notifications from every direction. She turned it off. That night, she wrote a letter to Elias. She wrote about the first time he made her laugh at that legal tech booth, about how she used to listen to his voicemail messages before bed, about how she once imagined their future, kids, Sunday dinners, growing old beside someone she thought was honest. Then she wrote, "You should have trusted me. I would have listened. I might not have stayed, but at least I could have chosen." She folded the letter, sealed it, then lit it on fire in the bathroom sink. Watched it turn to ash. 2 days later, she tried to go to the grocery store. Someone recognized her in the frozen food aisle. A man with a phone. He whispered something into his mic. She left her cart and walked out, heart pounding. Back at Simone's, she curled up on the couch with a blanket and stared at the ceiling for hours. When Simone offered to turn on the news, she shook her head. "I already know what they're saying, and none of them know me." But the worst moment came the following Sunday morning. She reached for her coffee mug, the one that said Mrs. Johnson in gold script. She held it, stared at it, then smashed it against the wall. It was the first time Simone saw her cry. Not the kind of cry you control. The kind that rips straight from your stomach like a fire you can't put out. "I don't want to kill him," she sobbed. "I just wanted the truth." Simone wrapped her arms around her, held her like she was 5 years old again, and whispered what no one else had dared to say yet. "You didn't kill him because of the truth. You killed him because he tried to trap you in a lie you didn't ask to live with." Tiana cried until her throat went raw. And when she finally fell asleep, her fingers were still clenched like she was holding on to something too painful to name. The autopsy confirmed what Tiana had already seen with her own eyes. Elias Johnson had no external genitalia, no penis, no testicles, and no surgical scars to suggest any removal. He had been born with a rare intersex condition called complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. In simple terms, Elias had XY chromosomes, but his body never developed male characteristics. He looked like a man. He was raised like a man. But biologically, he existed outside the binary. The forensic pathologist noted something else. Elias had gone to great lengths to hide his condition. His medical records had been sealed since childhood, and he had never seen a specialist in adulthood. No hormone therapy, no corrective procedures, just silence and secrecy. And now, a fatal fall, a pool of blood, and a new bride under arrest. At the station, Tiana sat across from Detective Marcus Harlan, a veteran investigator with a reputation for being thorough but fair. He had already read the preliminary report. He knew what they'd found, or rather, what they hadn't found, on Elias's body. But what he didn't understand yet was why it ended in death. Tiana hadn't slept. Her makeup had streaked down her face. Her wedding hair was half fallen, and her eyes were distant, like she was floating somewhere outside her own body. "Mrs. Johnson," Harlan began carefully, "can you tell me what happened in that hotel room?" She exhaled, slowly. Her voice came out like wind through broken glass. "He lied to me. About who he was. About everything. Did he ever threaten you?" "Not until that night. He said if I left, he'd destroy me, ruin my career, drag my name through the mud. And then he grabbed me. I pushed him. He fell. That's it. I didn't mean to kill him." Harlan paused. "Did you know about his condition before that night?" Tiana shook her head. "Not a clue. He talked about waiting for marriage like it was holy. I thought he was just disciplined. Pure. I didn't know it was a cover." Meanwhile, news of Elias's death sent shockwaves across the legal community. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a public figure, a best-selling author, and a black professional many looked up to. The idea that he had kept such a monumental secret, not from the public, but from his own wife, sparked a cultural firestorm. Talk shows ran wild with speculation. Was it deception or self-preservation? Was Tiana a victim of manipulation or a killer who couldn't accept the truth? Elias's law firm released a cold, calculated statement. "We are heartbroken by the loss of our colleague and friend. We ask the public not to rush to judgment." But privately, partners scrambled to distance the firm from the scandal. Sponsorships were dropped. Book deals evaporated. TV networks removed reruns of his segments. What was once a career built on integrity and emotional intelligence had disintegrated overnight. Outside the headlines, there were people who knew Elias in pieces, fragments of a man none of them had ever fully assembled. At the law firm, his assistant, Renee Foster, stared at his empty office for days. She was the one who color-coded his schedule, who reminded him to eat between court appearances, who once bought him a birthday cake even though he told everyone he didn't celebrate. "I thought he was just private," she told a colleague. "I didn't know he was hiding." In the staff kitchen, whispers spread like coffee steam. "Did you hear he never used the men's locker room at the gym downstairs? He used to say marriage was about transparency." What a joke. But not everyone was cruel. A junior associate, Marcus Lee, quietly removed Elias's nameplate from the door and placed it in a drawer. He was still a brilliant lawyer, he said. A complicated man doesn't erase that. At Spelman College, Professor Gloria Maynard stood before her gender and law seminar and rewrote her entire lesson plan. "Next week," she told her students, "we're talking about identity concealment and the law. Not in theory, but in practice. Because when the truth costs you your livelihood, your relationships, your safety, who decides when you're supposed to speak it?" At a coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta, two women sat across from each other. Both had once dated Elias briefly, years apart. One sipped her drink and said, "He always kept the lights off. Said it helped him focus on the soul. I thought it was poetic. Now I think it was fear." The other nodded. "He made me feel special. And then he just vanished." Neither of them blamed Tiana. Both of them had questions they'd never get answers to. Meanwhile, Tiana's old boss at the data firm gave a statement to HR. She's on leave. Indefinite. Paid, of course. But behind closed doors, he asked his team, "You think she knew before the wedding? Or is she just playing the victim card now?" Not everyone doubted her. A woman named Latrice, the building security guard who always waved Tiana in at 8:56 every morning, posted a single tweet that went viral. "She smiled at me every day for 3 years. Ain't no way that woman meant to hurt anyone. The world hurt her first." 100,000 retweets. One truth. Even the pastor who officiated their wedding released a short statement. None of us can see the whole of a person's story. But I pray for healing for all involved, and for a world where shame doesn't demand silence. But the person whose silence spoke the loudest was Elias's sister, Marlene. She had flown in from D.C. for the funeral, stood alone at the edge of the gravesite, and refused every interview request that came after. A close family friend later revealed she had once asked Elias, years ago, why he never dated. He'd smiled and said, "I'm just waiting for someone who sees me beyond the surface." Now she wondered, was that a hint or a plea? Tiana, out on bail and staying at her cousin's house, couldn't even leave to get groceries without reporters swarming her car. They called her the bride who snapped. They called him the lawyer with no secrets, except one. And somewhere in the noise, the truth got blurred. A month later, prosecutors filed charges, involuntary manslaughter. Not because they thought Tiana planned it, but because someone had died and someone had to pay. The DA, under pressure from public outrage, didn't want to look like they were giving her a free pass. Tiana's attorney, Angela Reed, a black woman herself, stood firm. This is not about revenge. This is about deception so profound, it stripped my client of her agency. This was a trauma response, not a calculated act. In a bold legal move, Reed filed a motion to admit Elias's intersex condition and lifelong concealment as part of the defense. It was unprecedented. The courtroom would now have to confront a conversation society wasn't ready for. What happens when love is built on lies so deep they erase consent? During the preliminary hearing, the prosecution painted Tiana as emotionally unstable, a woman humiliated by her wedding night and acting out in rage. But Reed countered with voice messages, emails, and handwritten notes that Elias had drafted but never sent. One of them read, "If she finds out, I'll lose her. But I've waited too long to be this close to normal. I deserve this. I deserve one shot." Another, dated 2 weeks before the wedding. "I love her. I do. But what if she looks at me like I'm a monster?" The judge listened. The media turned. The narrative shifted from a jealous woman's crime of passion to a woman pushed to the edge by a truth too painful to process. In private, Tiana still struggled with guilt. She didn't hate Elias. She never had. "I just wish he had trusted me enough," she told Angela one night. "I could have handled the truth. I couldn't handle the lie." Angela nodded slowly. He was scared. People like him, they live in fear every day. But fear doesn't excuse manipulation. "Do you think I'm a monster?" Tiana whispered. Angela looked her in the eye. "No, I think you're a woman who was denied the truth and paid the highest price for someone else's shame." The trial was set for fall, but the world had already chosen sides. Some called it tragedy. Some called it justice. Others just called it confusing. But for Tiana Brooks, none of that mattered. She had buried her husband. She had lost her future. And now, she had to fight for what little of her life still remained. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the benches. Activists stood outside with signs, some defending intersex rights, others demanding justice for Tiana Brooks. The whole thing had become a cultural battleground, where gender identity, consent, deception, and trauma collided. Tiana entered the courtroom in a dark navy dress. No makeup, her natural curls pulled back. The wedding ring was gone. So was the woman who once smiled on the cover of Atlanta Brides magazine. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like someone who had lost everything. The prosecution opened strong. District Attorney Cole Matthews was a sharp, relentless speaker who framed the case in black and white terms. The defendant pushed her husband with enough force to cause fatal blunt trauma to the skull. This wasn't an accident. It was anger. It was betrayal, yes, but betrayal does not justify homicide. He paused before delivering the line he knew would make headlines. If we excuse killing someone over personal disappointment, where do we draw the line? To him, this was about accountability. But when Angela Reed stood to speak, the temperature in the room shifted. She didn't yell. She didn't dramatize. She spoke in calm, measured tones, the voice of reason in a storm of confusion. Ladies and gentlemen, what would you do if the person you married turned out to be a stranger? Not because of who they are biologically, but because they build an entire identity, an entire relationship on a lie. She showed the jury the timeline, the emails, the notes Elias wrote but never sent, the sealed medical records from his childhood, the evidence that he knew he was hiding something enormous and chose not to tell the woman he promised to love. Angela's closing argument echoed long after court adjourned that day. We're not here to judge Elias Johnson for being intersex. We are here because he deceived his wife into marrying him under false pretenses, and when she discovered the truth, he physically restrained her in an attempt to protect his secret. That's not love. That's coercion. That's control. The testimony was wrenching. A forensic psychologist described how Tiana likely experienced an acute dissociative panic reaction, a combination of betrayal trauma and physical threat. Another expert in intersex identity took the stand to explain Elias's possible motives: shame, fear, internalized stigma. Many intersex individuals face lifelong pressure to conform. Elias may have believed deception was the only path to normalcy. But the turning point came when the security footage from the hotel hallway was played. It showed Elias chasing after Tiana, grabbing her wrist, pulling her back into the room. There was no sound, but the image spoke volumes. When Tiana finally took the stand, the room went silent. She spoke softly, clearly. Her voice broke more than once. I didn't hate him. I loved him. That's what made it so devastating. He didn't trust me with the truth. He made me feel like I was part of some experiment, like I was just a prop in the life he wanted to create. Angela asked, "Did you intend to kill your husband?" Tiana shook her head, tears spilling. "No, I just wanted to leave. I just wanted out." The jury deliberated for 2 days. Outside, protesters chanted. Some called Tiana a murderer. Others called her a victim. Inside, the courtroom braced for a verdict that would ripple far beyond those 4 walls. Finally, the judge called everyone in. The 4-person stood. On the charge of involuntary manslaughter, we find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp filled the room. Tiana closed her eyes. Her shoulders sank, but she didn't cry. At sentencing, Judge Renee Whitmore, a black woman in her 50s with a reputation for balancing justice with mercy, spoke directly to Tiana. This case is not just about law. It's about trust, identity, and what happens when secrets go too deep for too long. She paused. "Mrs. Brooks, you are not a danger to society. But a man is dead, and the court cannot ignore that." Then came the sentence. 3 years probation. 12 months of mandated therapy. No prison time. Tiana was free to go home, but not without scars. In the weeks that followed, think pieces flooded the internet. Some said the sentence was too light. Others said the trial never should have happened. Legal podcasts debated whether informed consent should apply to identity and medical history in marriage. Civil rights groups warned against turning rare intersex cases into cautionary tales of deceit. But for Tiana, there was no public narrative that could explain what she had lived through. She left Atlanta quietly, deleted all her social media, changed her number, took a job in Charleston under a different last name. The spotlight moved on, but she never really escaped it. 1 year later, a journalist tracked her down and asked her one final question. "Do you still think about Elias?" She looked away. "Every day, but not the man I married. The boy who was so ashamed of who he was, he thought he had to lie to be loved. That's the real tragedy. And perhaps that's the hardest truth in all of this. Not all deception comes from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from fear. But fear, when hidden too long, can still destroy everything. Tiana never went back to Atlanta. Too many memories. Too many whispers. Too many places where people looked at her not as a woman, but as a headline. She settled into a small rental home on the outskirts of Charleston. Quiet street. Old oak trees. A porch swing she barely used. She took a job under her maiden name at a nonprofit that provided tech training for low-income women. It didn't pay much, but it gave her purpose. Structure. Something to wake up for. Every morning, she still made coffee for two, out of habit. And every night, she still slept on one side of the bed. Grief doesn't always come from losing someone you love. Sometimes, it comes from losing the version of them you believed in. The court-ordered therapy started off as a formality. One session a week, talk about the past, don't cry too much. But Dr. Elaine Patterson didn't let her off easy. You didn't just lose a husband, the therapist said in their second session. You lost your sense of reality, of control. Tiana didn't answer. Dr. Patterson leaned in. Do you think you're angry because Elias lied? Or because you never saw it coming? Tiana clenched her jaw. Both. She paused. Then, he took away my ability to say no. I thought I was marrying a man who lived by truth. But he was building a life on fear. And he dragged me into it without asking. She didn't talk to reporters. She didn't write a book. She didn't sign the documentary deal Netflix sent her way. The story was already too loud. She wanted silence. But one day, nearly 8 months after the trial, she received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just her name in a familiar, rigid cursive. Inside was a single-page note. You don't know me, but I knew Elias. I dated him briefly back in 2014. He ended at the moment I started asking questions. I always wondered why he was so afraid. After everything that happened, I just wanted to know you weren't the only one he shut out. At the bottom, it simply read, he wasn't trying to hurt you. He just didn't know how to let anyone in. It didn't change everything, but it helped. Tiana began writing, not a book, but a journal. Letters she'd never sent. Thoughts she couldn't say out loud. Reflections about identity, honesty, the damage silence can do. One entry read, what I went through wasn't about genitals. It was about being denied the truth. You don't get to decide what someone can or can't handle. That's not love. That's control dressed as protection. Another, I don't hate him, but I do hate that he didn't believe I could love the real him. Maybe I wouldn't have, but I never got the chance. A year to the day after the wedding, she returned to Atlanta for the first time. She didn't go to the courthouse, or her old apartment, or the hotel suite. She went to Elias's grave. It was modest, just a gray headstone under a row of dogwoods. Someone had left fresh lilies. Maybe his sister. Maybe an old client. Maybe someone who only knew the version of him he allowed the world to see. Tiana stood there for a long time. Said nothing. Just closed her eyes and let the wind speak. When she finally opened her mouth, her voice was barely a whisper. I wish you trusted me. And that was all. 6 months later, she started volunteering at a local community center, leading group discussions for women who had survived toxic relationships. Not just romantic ones, but professional, familial, even spiritual. She didn't share her full story. Just pieces. Just enough. At the end of one session, a young woman approached her, barely 20, eyes heavy with fear. How did you stop feeling ashamed? The girl asked. Tiana smiled gently. By remembering that someone else's secrets don't make me dirty. Over time, the noise faded. The Google results dropped lower on the page. People stopped recognizing her in grocery stores. She began dating again, carefully, honestly. The first man she told about her past looked at her for a long moment, then said, that sounds like something that could have broken anyone. But it didn't break you. And maybe he was right. Because the truth is, Tiana Brooks didn't kill Elias Johnson because of who he was. She killed him in a moment of chaos, grief, and panic because he refused to be who he claimed to be and then tried to force her to stay silent. It wasn't premeditated, but it was a tragedy that began the moment Elias chose fear over truth. 2 years had passed. The media had long since moved on. The headlines were buried beneath newer scandals, newer victims, newer names that trended for a week, maybe two, then faded into digital dust. But for Tiana Brooks, the story hadn't ended. It had simply changed shape. She still woke from dreams of a hotel room that smelled of roses and blood. Still caught her breath when she heard the word wedding. Still hesitated before letting anyone close enough to touch the places Elias had scarred without laying a hand. But healing had found its way into the cracks. Slowly, quietly, like rain seeping into dry earth. And with that healing came purpose. It started small. Tiana began writing articles under a pseudonym. Pieces about consent, emotional deception, and the invisible kinds of abuse no one talks about. Her words resonated. Women from across the country emailed, messaged, shared their own stories of being misled, manipulated, cornered into relationships built on unspoken truths. She didn't need to say her name. They already understood her pain. Then came a podcast. A friend she'd met at the community center encouraged her to speak publicly. Not about Elias, not directly, but about the experience of surviving a betrayal so intimate it left no visible bruises. The podcast, titled Say It First, became an underground hit. No true crime narration, no clickbait, just voices, women, men, intersex, trans, cis, all grappling with the question. What happens when someone you love doesn't give you the truth you deserve? One episode featured a man named Devin who had been married for 7 years before discovering his wife was living a double life. Another guest, a trans woman named Casey, spoke about being rejected violently after disclosing her identity post-intimacy. But none of it was about revenge or spectacle. It was about honesty and the right of every human being to make informed choices about who they love, trust, and marry. Tiana never gave her last name on the show, but the people who needed it always knew it was her. Not everyone was ready to let the story go quietly. In the months after the trial, advocacy groups began pushing for legal reform, something they called relational consent transparency. The core idea was simple. If you're entering a legally binding marital contract, there should be disclosure about significant medical, biological, or identity-related factors that could materially affect your partner's consent. Civil liberties groups pushed back. They warned of creating a forced outing culture, especially for trans and intersex individuals who already face systemic discrimination. But survivor advocacy networks countered with a question Tiana herself once asked. How can I say yes if I never knew what I was saying yes to? A bill nicknamed the Brooks Clause quietly made its way through the Georgia House Judiciary Committee. It didn't pass, but it sparked the first public hearing in state history on the topic of medical non-disclosure in marriage, broadcast live, drawing over 1 million online views. Tiana never attended, but she watched from her laptop, alone in her rental house, wrapped in a blanket and disbelief. The discussion wasn't about Elias. Not anymore. It was about a world trying and failing to hold space for both truth and protection. Universities launched think tanks. Law journals published essays with titles like When Privacy Becomes Deception and The Ethics of Disclosure in Postmodern Marriage. Even Oprah weighed in, saying on air, this wasn't about gender. It was about truth and the danger of building intimacy on silence. Churches debated it. Therapists reframed how they approached premarital counseling. Some even created anonymous disclosure tools, digital templates that allowed couples to share sensitive information early in relationships without fear of immediate judgment. and in quiet living rooms across the country, couples began having conversations they'd avoided for years. One woman told a reporter, "I asked my husband if there was anything he hadn't told me, and we ended up talking for 6 hours. It wasn't about secrets. It was about safety." A man in Boston emailed the Say It First podcast saying, "Because of your show, I told my fiancé I was born with a heart defect I've hidden my whole life." She cried, but she didn't leave. That moment changed everything. What Tiana had endured wasn't unique in its pain, but it was rare in its visibility. And visibility, like truth, had power. Elias's legacy had changed, too. The law firm where he once worked now hosted annual seminars on identity disclosure and consent ethics. Quietly, without fanfare, his alma mater removed his name from their alumni showcase, but funded a scholarship in his name for intersex students. His sister, Marlene, reached out to Tiana on the second anniversary of his death. They hadn't spoken since the trial. The message read, "I hated you. I won't lie. But I've come to understand that my brother wasn't just hiding from you. He was hiding from all of us. I wish he trusted us. I wish we had made it safe for him to tell the truth." Tiana never replied, but she cried for the first time in months. Not out of anger, but out of grief for the man Elias could have been if the world, and he himself, had allowed it. One rainy morning, while walking through a local bookstore, Tiana stumbled upon a display table labeled "Voices That Change the Conversation." Among the titles sat a slim paperback book written by someone named DJ Walters. She flipped it open. The introduction read, "This is not a story of victims and villains. This is a story of what silence does to people, how it builds walls inside the ones we love, and how the people who break under that weight don't mean to hurt us, but often do." She smiled, closed the book, and bought a copy. That night, she sat on her porch with a blanket around her shoulders and a warm cup of tea. The air smelled like rain. Monroe, her old cat, curled at her feet. She thought about what Elias might have become if he had lived, whether they could have rebuilt from honesty, whether he would have been strong enough to tell the world who he was, and let the world love him anyway. But the what-ifs didn't hurt as much anymore. They were no longer knives, just echoes. And echoes, she had learned, can fade. One of the last entries in her journal read, "Some people will only ever love you through mirrors, reflections of what they want you to believe. It's not your fault if the mirror breaks, but you can choose what to do with the shards." She closed the journal, set it on the table beside her, and whispered one final truth to herself. "I chose to survive." And that, in the end, was the legacy that remained. Not the courtroom, not the wedding, not even the man who died, but the woman who lived. Final note. This story is a reminder that honesty isn't just a virtue. It's a responsibility, especially in love, especially when the truth could change someone else's entire future. For Tiana Brooks, redemption didn't come from being found not guilty. It came from learning that she was never the one who should have been ashamed, and that healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with honesty.